Thank you, Steve. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to be here and see all you face to face again after so many years. Well, when I came here, I realized that the title of this presentation lacks any kind of geographical reference, so sorry about this. It should end by saying in northwestern Iberia. Okay, northwest of Spain and northern Portugal, and this is the region that I'm going to talk about today. Well, the background of this presentation I will do today is a presentation I did in 2020 AARG meeting, one of these online pandemic meetings, that was later published in our news. Perhaps some of you came across this publication or not. And it told the story of why in this part of the world aerial archaeology had been seldom practiced in the past due to a number of reasons, especially because of the lack of aerial images to use for interpretation, and also because of the, let's say, hostile characteristics of the landscape of the region that are not very prone to the location or identification of crop marks and things like that. But even so, by some chance, it happened that we started to find, while looking for something else, started to find some potential traces of archaeological things across different aerial images that are today available for this region. And this encouraged us to ask to what extent this has the potential to incorporate new types of elements into the archaeological record of the region and to tackle some archaeological questions that at the moment had been replied using only the record that is preserved and available and visible on the surface of the ground. So me, together with my colleague David González, which is over there, thought that it was perhaps a good idea to start a systematic approach to the use of these data sets to tackle one of the longest lasting questions of the archaeological research. Okay, so we thought that this could be useful to tackle, as I said, one of the longest lasting archaeological questions for the study of the Iron Age in this region. The question is, what's happening outside the hillforts in the area? Iron Age settlement pattern in this region is composed of a very dense amount of settlements that are, in all cases, fortified. Are small to medium-sized settlements, 1-2 hectares in size. Regularly, there are some larger ones, but in general, this is the pattern. But we know a lot of what's going on inside these sites. Many of them have been excavated, lots of materials, domestic architecture, things like that. But we know very little about what these communities were doing outside the limits of the walls of their settlements. So we thought, well, perhaps using these new data sets that we have available now, we can have new information that can help us to reply to this long-lasting question. So we decided to do this thing in 3 study areas. Each of them is about 1,000 square kilometers that are distributed in 3 different landscape regions in the northwest of Iberia and 3 regions that are also different in archaeological terms, somehow different, slightly different in the archaeological record of the Iron Age in the area. I will refer today to some preliminary results that we had in this first study area here, which is almost finished, this remote sensing approach. So we have more robust data for this region here. The data sources we used are all of them publicly available. We, at the moment, well, I will talk a little bit about this in the end. We just started doing our own data capture using drones and things like that. But basically, this is based on publicly available data sets, which are listed in this slide here. We have this historical aerial imagery that Antonio mentioned in his presentation today, which is from the 50s. From the mid-50s, and this was the only source of aerial imagery in this region until the late 90s. So there were no other aerial pictures to be used for photo interpretation. So since the late 90s and the early 21st century, we have regular coverages of the whole territory of Spain by the Spanish government. Every 3-4 years, we have a new coverage covering the area. And then we have, of course, the free satellite imagery available in Google Earth, this historical imagery tool. You all know about it. And this world imagery way back that I will describe in a little bit in more detail just now. And then, of course, different LiDAR visualization using this invaluable relief visualization toolbox that we all know and we all use very much. And thanks again to Siga and his colleagues in Slovenia for doing this available to all of us. As I came across this world imagery way back thing that I really haven't seen mentioned very often in the literature. I discovered it last year, and I thought that perhaps some of you didn't know about it too. So I decided to include something like a footnote to describe a little bit this particular source of data, because the other are very well known by anyone. This world imagery way back is a series of, it's something very similar to the Google historic images that is available at this website as a standalone website where you can place yourself in any part of the world, and you have a list of all the imagery that they have available here. Some of these images are the same that you will find in Google. Some of them, at least in the case of our study area, are the images of these national Spanish orthophoto flights, and some others, I didn't find them elsewhere. So I think it's a very useful addition to the most common Google Earth historical images. As you can see, you can pan or zoom to any place in the world, and you have a list of the images available with the date, sorry. And then it has a very useful embedded animation thing that draws you automatically through all the images existing for one particular part of the world. And this is, again, a very practical way to explore different images for one single part. As we all know, archaeological things are visible in some images, but not in some others. So this is, again, very practical and useful. And then it has also the added benefit of being accessible through WMS services. So you can put this into your desktop GIS, and you can use it to map on top of these images automatically to draw and things like that. So this is, again, very useful. And this was my footnote, just to let you, those of you that haven't heard about this thing, that it is there and it's useful and it's very practical. So a footnote ended. And then we go to the preliminary results of our approach. Let me drink a little bit. For this first study area, as I mentioned, we have as I said, it's almost finished, the review of all the sources, of all the remote sensing sources available, except for this lower part of the region here, where we still have to finish the work. We have found a number of new potential archaeological sites, which is about 100. It might seem that it's not a big deal, a big number of sites for such a big area, but you have to bear in mind that on the one hand, the density of archaeological sites already documented in the whole northwestern Iberia is extremely dense. And as I said at the beginning, this is the first time that digital remote sensing data are used to try to discover traces of archaeological features in this not so friendly landscape. So we believe it's a significant addition to the corpus of sites known in the area. This includes any type of sites, Iron Age, not Iron Age, anything we found that we thought could be archaeological sites. Then, if we refer to Iron Age hillforts that locally are called castros, we have found nine new sites that, again, might look like it's not a big number of new additions, but as I said, the density of these sites that were already known in this area is very, very big. And these hillforts, these castros, are usually the type of archaeological site that is best known, documented, and recognizable across this landscape, not only because they usually left visual features on the ground, but also because of place names that are very often referring to castros, things like that, and that point you to the existence of one of these sites at some point in the landscape. And also they are very well known by local populations because they have associated a number of folk tales and things like that. If you go to the field and ask someone, do you know of any archaeological site here? They always say, well, there's a castro over there, or my mother said that there was a castro over there. So finding 9 new sites, we think it's not bad. This is a map of the traces that we found through Lidar data, which is about 1,200 new individual features that, as you can see, are very much concentrated in different areas because we are looking with more interest and more intensively around these Iron Age hillforts that are the focus of our interest. The rest of the area, we are browsing it with less intensity, so perhaps there are more interesting features over there, but we are not paying so much attention to the areas that are far away from the known hillforts. And this is the distribution of the traces found in the different aerial imagery that we are using, which is about 1,400 individual features. And just a detail of one particular area, you can see that they are very much concentrated around the known or the newly discovered hillforts, but there are some others here and there that again point to that a more intense and dedicated attention to the whole landscape could unveil new interesting features over here. So, well, this is an example, just one example of how we are documenting these traces. This is a partially flattened out hillfort with a lot of different soil marks visible there. And the kind of documentation we are doing is summarized in this picture here. We are on the one hand interpreting the possible function or origin of every mark we find, if it's a wall or rampart, a ditch or pathway or something indeterminate. And then we're using a color scale to include some information about the certainty of this interpretation. So things that we are certain are walls or ditches or pathways, probable or possible, depending on how many different data sets they are visible, on how clear their morphology is, and things like that. So it's purely archaeological interpretation. So go back to the questions, to what this new data can tell us about the original question we had, which is what's going on around the hillforts in this area. And at the moment, we think that some of these findings are helping us to challenge some assumptions about how the Orange communities organize their lives in this area. These are the findings that are challenging the assumptions that I will describe in the next slides. First, the existence of monumental arrays of defensive features. Second, the existence of elaborated and enlarged access systems. And thirdly, the existence of sites with complex arrangements, including sites that are including different enclosures and things like that. Then we are also finding some traces of other types of activity outside these hillforts. In particular, in one specific case study where we did some fieldwork this summer, we found the remains of areas of production both of iron metallurgy and of cultivation fields, something that we know these people should be doing somewhere. And in many other parts of Europe, there are plenty of examples of fields from this period or from earlier periods of areas of metallurgical exploitation and so on, but not in this part here. So the identification of where these people were doing these things and how they looked like is again, although it might look like it's not very relevant or interesting, a very welcome addition to the archaeology of this area. This is still preliminary data, so I wouldn't mention this example here today, perhaps AARG next year, I don't know. So I will focus on the first 3 points here. And first, we think that these new findings are challenging some interpretations about the role of the defensive features around these sites. This is a quote from a quite recent work. There's some people that, as here as elsewhere in Western Europe, have been discussing the effective defensive role of the defenses of the hill forts, walls, ramparts, and so on. So in particular, ditches have been interpreted as, by some people, as elements without obvious functional function, and rather as elements used to architecturally prepare or modify a natural space to make it ready for occupation, to bound closed space, and to get some raw matter for the construction of the walls and so on, which is an interesting idea. But we have been finding that this is in some contradiction with the existence of multiple lines of ditches around some of these sites. This is one of these castros, very small, very typical. This is where the wall goes. And as you can see, there is at least a series of 4 concentric ditches around this site that contradict a little bit this idea that ditches are only used to bound a space and prepare an architectural platform for occupation. This is another image of the same thing, and you can see these concentric ditches here again. Another example, this is one here, a partially destroyed hill fort. That is, the right side has been, has been partially destroyed by cultivation. It was still standing complete in the 50s. And well, again, as you can see, the typical hill fort with one enclosure limited by a wall, then a concentric one. And then in this area, you can see the succession of different topographic anomalies today that can be easily related with the existence of a flattened series of walls and ditches in this particular area. Another image of the same site, and our interpretation that again seems to contradict a little bit this idea that this is only a way of delimiting a space with no further implications. And another example, this area that has been again flattened by cultivation, but still preserves some of the topographic forms of the original castro here, and some other, well, terracing and things like that, that we don't know how older they could be. This is much better visible in other visualizations of this Lidar, like this sky view factor image. And it's also visible, some of these traces are also visible in some aerial imagery, like this one here, where again, you can see that this, what looked like one single oval enclosure, had been in the past surrounded by a series of concentric ditches extending to the north in this case. This is, again, our interpretation here. I don't know how good I am. Okay. And the last example in this first paragraph is this one here. This is not the most obvious or spectacular example in terms of traces, of remote sensing traces. You can see some very subtle lines here that might look like no big deal. They appear in some other images, here, 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 and also with a larger extension here. Not the best example in terms of crop marks or soil marks, but it's a very good example because this site has been excavated in the last few years. And well, would be the interpretation we have. And the people who excavated inside the site, as you can see, this is the excavation area, decided to open a couple of test pit surveys in 2 of these potential ditches. And what they found is this. This is pit number 1, pit number 2. So pit number 1, pit number 2, 2 massive ditches, especially in pit number 2 is a ditch with 8 meters wide and more than 5 meters deep. That looks like a strange way of collecting raw matter for building a wall. So it's a good way also to have a direct view of what these traces could correspond to when you do some fieldwork on them. So yeah, this is what we are finding in many places around this area. A second assumed idea that these new findings are challenging is the existence of some elaborated and enlarged access systems. This is a 3D reconstruction of one hill fort in the north of Portugal. very nice, very well done, and it gives you the typical image that both the general public and many archaeologists have had in the past about how one of these sites may look like. Simple walls, one entrance here, very simple, nothing especially complex, very functional if you want, way of enclosing a space, and that's it. But we are finding that, especially towards the access, the original access of these sites, things were a bit more elaborated. This is a good example. The hillfort has been partially flattened out by cultivation here, but as you can see, in the original access, well, what you think it's the original access to the site, there's a succession of some walls, ramparts, and ditches, and then there are also some other topographical anomalies around this area that align very well with this path here, and that might give us a picture of a much more complex system of architectural scenery towards the access of these sites. Another good example is this one here. This is a densely forested site that is only visible through Lidar, and that was documented as extending across this area only, but Lidar allows you to see also these strange things here that align very well to the access of the site, and that again make an extremely complex and elongated system of access that speaks us about the relevance of the access to the site, the construction of artificial sceneries, monumentality, and things like that that have been seldom considered in the past when interpreting these kind of sites. And another very good example here, a site that is very damaged by cultivation, has been very damaged by cultivation in the last few years. Again, a small circular site here with some subtle traces of things going on here and there, but not very clear in this old image. Much more clear in this more recent image here, the site very damaged today, but then you have remains of things going on here and there. And Lidar, again, gives interesting information about this, concentric series of ditches, walls, and things like that. All of them align towards one direction around the site. So it's, again, an extremely complex and extensive system of access to a very small and simple site that, as I said, challenges quite a lot what we think we knew about the morphology of these sites, the investment of work in the construction of the artificial structures, and many other things with a lot of implications when interpreting the dynamics of these societies. And third, the third point that is being challenged by these findings is the existence of sites with complex arrangements. It has been said that the social structure of these communities was based on very simple social relations with a lack of hierarchy, on very equalitarian societies that avoided by any means the growing beyond a critical point that might have implied the development of inequalities inside the groups and so on. So in the case when these communities were growing too much, what they did were dividing and building a new community in a different place to keep within a small size and to keep going on this kind of very hierarchical relations. This is true in many cases. For instance, we have this case here, a hill fort on top of this small hill, and this was already documented and known, and we found this other one, these remains here that were not documented previously, and that were complemented very well by these crop marks here. And that might be a very good example of this kind of fission of communities. Perhaps this community was growing too much, and then part of the community segregated and went to live to this other place. Perhaps there's a difference in time here. In any case, this might fit very well with this idea. But that's not always the case. We have found some other examples that challenge this idea and that prove that sometimes these communities were really growing beyond this small size and getting sizes that were much bigger than before. You probably can see nothing here, which is fair enough because there's nothing very well visible. This is a good example of the typical landscape of Galicia. You can see it's not very friendly for finding traces here, lots of forested areas, a lot of scrubland, very small parcels, things like that. Well, This is the location of what were considered to be two Iron Age hillforts, very similar to the example I showed you before. One hillfort here, on top of this area here, and another one here, but much more damaged, very not so well preserved. This area was excavated during the, this area was excavated during the construction of this railway, and they documented, again, significant number of ditches around this small, the second hillfort here. But these were considered to be two different sites, perhaps one earlier in time than the other, or perhaps the result of the fission of a community and so on. Lidar data allows you to see the sites much better. This is very well preserved. This is not so much. This was lost, or this area here. This is modern terracing. And in this case, it was not remote sensing what gave us the clue to interpret the site, but it was geophysics. We did a small magnetometry survey here, and we found that these ditches were continuing this way, and most significantly, that some of these ditches were connecting to these other ones here. So the interpretation is that at least at some point in history, this was just one big single site where perhaps one of these communities was grow too much and extended beyond the limits of the initial site to make this a much larger site. And this, then my last example, very similar, a site that had been excavated for many years on top of this hill. You can see the wall here, a significant part of it has been excavated, and there's a steep slope around, and walls and ditches in this area. So the site was considered to be a small one within the limits of these walls. You can see the LiDAR here. And this LiDAR gave us some clues that there was something else going on other than just steep slopes in this area. You can see, for instance, this is modern paths. But here, beyond the path, there's kind of a small elevation with a small ditch around, some other pieces of strange things here, and some subtle traces of terracing all around this slope. Again, this slope was excavated in these three sites, and they found that it was actually inhabited at some point in time. So again, this was a small community that grew beyond the limits initially planned, but didn't fission, but grew to become a much greater community, and perhaps involving the development of more complex social relations, something like that. So my final comment is that we believe that remote sensing data here are providing a significant amount of new evidence, not only in quantitative terms, but also in terms that just are allowing us to challenge ideas, because we are incorporating evidence that we didn't knew about it before, and that might help us to reshape the picture and think differently about these communities of the Iron Age. And as I said before, we will combine this with more dedicated case studies, with specific data capture and things like that, and perhaps next year we'll tell you about this. Thank you very much.